Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm trying to figure out how to break that up because I basically say the same thing, and I tried different inflections there, but I don't know, whatever. If any of you have some suggestions on how I can change up the intro, let me know, because I just lock in a pattern, and it's comfortable, and you sit there, and you do it, and it's dependable. Anyways, I am your host, Ray Harkins, and we are at episode number 40. That's where we're at. The dirty 30, 40's over the hill. I don't know. Not like these are actual years. These are just weeks. But anyways, I have a very special guest on this week. I recorded it a little bit ago, but I was really excited about it. John Feldmann, he is from the band Goldfinger. He is a platinum recording artist, and he is also a platinum recording engineer, producer, all that stuff. So more about him in a minute. propertyofzach.com. Check it out. All the latest and greatest on all of the music that you care about, all of the tours you care about. Everything you care about in regards to music will be located there. So visit propertyofzach.com. And we love our partnership with them. And don't fuck around. Go visit the website. Learn some shit. And also visit the website. When I say the website, I mean the podcast's website. 100wordspodcast.com. Towards the end of last year, I posted top 5 lists from a lot of our previous guests, and people seem to enjoy that. We got a lot of sort of feedback and likes on Tumblr and reblogs and all that fun stuff. So check it out. I try to put up a decent amount of content each week, either recommendations, good music, good movies, whatever the case may be. Check it out. And review the show. We're getting closer to the magical 100 mark as far as 100-star reviews. Go there, spend 3 seconds, give it a star rating, spend a minute, and write some words about the show. I do appreciate that when people do that, and I wish I could give them a digital high five, even if they're critical of it, even if they're like, you know what, I like the way that the show used to be back in the day when you had 2 of your friends on with you. I get that. Totally fine. I unfortunately can't do that anymore because it's pretty difficult to schedule with that many people. But for the foreseeable future, this is what you get. So, but I appreciate the feedback regardless. Anyways, notice how I was kind of like defensive with that. I was like, but no, this is how it is. Like, you have to deal with it. I think it's just so funny. Anytime you have any sort of critique, your mind immediately goes on the defense. And it's like, well, wait, what do you mean? Like, what? That's kind of fucked up. You don't like this? You don't like what I'm doing? And I always try to constantly remind myself, like, no. That's just someone being honest. Like, chill out. And I am chilled out. So, before we get into the show and the interview, a few random things that have been on my mind as of late. And I can't remember where this was derived from, or what sparked the thought, but how none of us have a really unique experience. So that premise of, I look at myself personally. So here I am, white dude, into hardcore music, into punk music, into independent culture. I am straight edge myself, and I label myself as such. So no drinking, no drugs, alcohol, that type of stuff. I also, have a dietary thing going on. I've been vegetarian and vegan for most of my life. I definitely am a niche of a niche of a niche, and you kind of drill down, and obviously the fewer people you have that put those sort of labels on themselves. But when it boils down to it, it's like I may be unique in the sense of the term where, I walk into a mall and, you interview 100 people and maybe me and one other person have some of those labels. But, realistically, there's a lot of people that have similar experiences to you, no matter how unique your experience is. It could, I think this came from the fact that I've had a lot of people talking to me recently in regards to my grandmother passing away, and it's very strange because this holiday season, like death has kind of been around, which is strange because when I say around, I say some of my coworkers have experienced loss, and some of my other friends have experienced loss, and so it's kind of weird to have that all sort of in a 2 month period of just like, oh wow, like that's a lot. But I think on the flip side of the callousness of the we have no unique experiences, everybody's experienced the same shit that you have, so don't think that you're unique, is the fact that there's common bonds. Like we obviously try to reach out to one another. We all crave that experience of having at least one person who you could be like, you know what, I can go to them. They can offer me advice, a shoulder to cry on, whatever the case may be. They can be that person that's there to support me, whether it's a friend or a family member. And I think for me, that always gives me some comfort where it's like, even if I don't see what I consider my close friends on a daily, weekly, or even monthly basis, it's the fact that I know I can pick up the phone, I can call them for something as stupid as a ride from the airport, or something as monumental as like, oh, I've experienced death, or someone is sick in my family, or a friend of mine is sick, or whatever. That they will be there to support me. And yeah, so I just, kind of, because I think the way that the internet culture is like, even though we're all more connected, we obviously feel more distant from one another because we do spend a lot of our times in front of a computer. And we do, I think it's so funny when you run into a person who you haven't seen in a while, but you obviously follow them on whatever social network they're a part of. You kind of feel like you can just step right back into it, which is cool. And I love that because there's never that sort of awkward, like, oh, what have you been up to? Where do you work? Like, because, I think that for me, that gets old really quick. I'm just like, I just want to get through that and like know what you're up to. And then like, how are you doing? Like, really, how are you doing? So, anyways, that's been on my mind. Um, John Feldman, he's in Goldfinger. Goldfinger still performs. Goldfinger still tours. They're just smart about it. They're not out 300 some odd days of the year. But yeah, John Feldman, everyone has always spoken so highly of him, and that's really difficult within the music industry to navigate all these waters, deal with so many different people, and no one be like, yo, fuck that guy. He's a dick or whatever. Everybody that's ever worked with him that I know, everybody that's worked with him professionally, casually, whatever, has always said really positive things about him. So um, I do a lot of work with John in my day job. And so I just, casually one day in an email chain that we were shooting back and forth to one another, I said, hey, would you be interested in coming on the show? And he was like, oh, I'd love to do that, which was great because I don't know, I'm always, for people that I don't know really well, I'm always scared to ask them to do this show because even though it is fun and obviously gives them an opportunity to kind of express themselves in a different way, I always feel that sense of rejection. I feel like I'm like asking a girl to dance and she's like, you know what? No. And it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. But anyways, John was super gracious, had me over to his house and his recording studio. Super nice place. It's awesome to see all of the hard work that he's put in, be able to pay off and be able to, give a nice home to his family and his daughters and all that type of stuff. So anyways, we covered a lot of shit. So I've talked for way too long. Here it is. John. Because I'm 32 years old, so when I was, 94, 95, like when obviously, and being from Southern California, third wave ska, like, I mean, give me a break. You could not escape that in any way, shape, or form. And my own personal background is like I'm more of a punk and a hardcore kid, but just seeing how pervasive that was of like obviously all the shows that existed in Orange County. But it was funny because like most of it, it just didn't appeal to me. It was just like, whatever. Like, cause I dated a girl that, she'd go to my hardcore shows. I would go to her ska shows. And so it's like seeing a lot of these bands that were, in all honesty, just terrible in my own mind. But then what Goldfinger and what you guys did, there was a certain edge to it that appealed to me, where it was like a little like, oh, it's a little more quote unquote aggressive. Like, I don't know, it was something that was so interesting, and I think, like, I really do believe that that sort of movement could have not existed anywhere else in the country. Like, it just seemed to kind of hit everything in Southern California. Like, because I just don't, that couldn't have happened in like Connecticut. It couldn't have happened in Florida. Did you was that something that you, like, looking back on, like, would you agree with that statement, or is it like?
Absolutely, absolutely. In hindsight, though, I think our best shows.
Yeah.
I don't want to say best shows, but some of our greatest shows have been in the Northeast, in Connecticut,
really,
in Boston, New York City. I mean, and I think that there obviously is a tie-in to, there's a couple bands that I think slip between second wave and third wave,
sure.
like Fishbone, the Mighty Mighty Bosstones.
Yep.
It kind of came before what Southern California did, and because the Bosstones were such a big band on the East Coast, I think there was a connection that was made between what we were doing here and what they had already done.
Sure.
On the East Coast. But for some odd reason, we just did a tour in June,
right,
a few months ago, and every show was sold out, and it was all kind of Northeast. We went down. We ended in Norfolk, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
And so we started up Providence. So we kind of just did all basically the East, Northeast, and
sure,
it was unbelievably great. And we're talking, if we started towards the end of '93,
yeah,
and now it's 2012. We're 19 years as a group, and clearly, like, we had a huge success kind of right at radio when our first album came off. And then we kind of maintained it for 3 albums. We did really well, and it was great. And then it sort of, I sort of started producing, and we didn't really continue touring to the extent that we did. But just to think that even though it definitely lulled.
Of course,
we're not in the heyday of the '97 Superman Tony Hawk.
No.
But still, to sell out this tours is a big deal.
For sure.
To me, it feels like we were part of something.
Yep.
That mattered, and it still matters, and it wasn't just about a great song.
Totally, and it wasn't. Yeah, that was something I was going to address later on, where the idea that it's like, to be able to survive, and I use that word very literally, survive having such a successful song at radio, and being able to still put records out after that are still of that sort of quality. Like, I mean, that's really difficult to do. I mean, you've seen obviously so many bands get chewed up in the system, and it's like, after one song hits, where it's like, all right, where's the next one? Like, and sometimes it just doesn't happen, and then they obviously want it to be as successful as the first one, if not more. And it's just like, to be able to be where you're at right now and still play in front of people that are passionate about it shows that obviously it wasn't just this fad, that wasn't just this moment in time.
And it does. I mean, this is my career. It's where
right.
I'm in the music business, so I think about it day in and day out.
Sure.
And I think about how, since the internet revolution, I don't know if there's going to be another, like, Seattle of the early 90s,
right.
or even like the pop punk thing that happened in the Bay Area, in the mid 90s, like those kind of scenes that happened.
Yep.
In a very specific area
for sure
of the world. I just don't know if it can, because the scene now is the internet, and the community is the internet, so it's a global scene.
Yeah. And
so if one person starts something in Manchester, like someone in Lubbock, Texas, can catch on the next day, and that's kind of what it is. And we came definitely out of a specific area scene, and I mean, I grew up on Southern California punk rock that wouldn't exist without the skate and the surf culture. And I think the same goes for the ska punk culture of the 90s. It went hand in hand with skating and surfing.
For sure.
And it's not, obviously people do surf on the East Coast. But it's hard. It's harder to skate when it's snow and ice everywhere. It's just
when you're out of pocket for 4 months because you can't do anything outside. Yeah.
Exactly. And Southern California is not like that, Mm-hmm. And obviously, like, coming from like punk rock roots, I mean, to me, for me, punk rock that changed my life started in Southern California, and it's like, I mean, love the Sex Pistols and I love the Clash and I love the Buzzcocks, and they definitely influenced me. But the stuff that made me want to play music came from Southern California.
Right.
You know, and I feel the same way about like the scene, and obviously like Pennywise and NoFX were a generation ahead of us.
Sure.
And they had the Epitaph and the Fat Records kind of scene, and it was based in a great live show with great songs, but it wasn't like on the radio. It wasn't like
no, for sure.
It was sort of like coming out of grunge. It was the anti-grunge movement. It was like, we are alive, we are here, we are present.
Right.
You know, and clearly all the sub-genres of punk like hardcore and ska all kind of went into the scene that we were in and affected it. But the roots came from touring, playing shows, and working really hard. It wasn't radio first. And bands I work with now, like Neon Trees was just on TV, and I've worked with them, and they and they're a great live band,
right?
And I have nothing but amazing things to say about it. I mean, Tyler's a vegan. It's really great guys,
for sure.
But they came out of radio, like they had a massive hit at radio with Animal,
right?
And so they're stuck to some extent with that, like, how do I write the next hit, the next hit, the next hit?
Yeah, they have to play in that sandbox. Yeah, for sure.
And I just don't know. I mean, I guess there's Warped, like the Underground, where to me most of the bands are very similar sounding with double kick drum. Every song has a breakdown.
Yeah.
You know, screaming, and then as soon as they start singing, fans think they sold out. Like that. Every band is kind of the same in that. What metalcore,
right? Whatever you like to call it,
yeah, post screamo,
right.
And so, but that scene has a ceiling. Mm-hmm. Like you can only really. So I mean, I know I'm getting off subject, but just think about where I came from and how. And even though, like by third record, we were affected dramatically by the internet, like record sales were. So we were definitely affected, but. We had two albums that really, like 96 with our self-titled and 97 with Hang-Ups. We weren't really affected, and both albums are right around gold, like 500,000.
Yeah.
And I look at bands now that are starting, and artists now that are starting, that don't have the ability to sell that kind of record. They don't have like a real foundation of a scene in their local town that they can kind of cling on to.
Right.
So you've got to be so much better than I was in 93 when I started Goldfinger. You have to be, because you have to create your own scene in your own town.
Right.
Like there's a band called 21 Pilots from Columbus, Ohio that I was working with, and they literally created their own scene in their town, and were selling out 2,000 seaters in Columbus.
Right.
And so everyone came to them.
Sure.
And that's kind of what you got to do. Where when it was us, I mean. The brief history is like I'm selling shoes at Nana on the Promenade, playing in my band, slip the demo tape in a shoebox to some record executive, get signed a week later, and we've been touring for a year, and we've got a thing going in here, a little thing. We're opening for the Skeletons, we're opening for Buck 09, we've got a little thing, but we played one show at South by Southwest where the booking agent for the Sex Pistols were there, and Kevin Weatherly, who does all the radio programming for K-Rock, which is the biggest alternative station in the world.
Right.
They were both there, and that one show changed everything for us. And I guess that can still happen. Yeah. But there needs to be so many more things: Twitter followers and Facebook.
Of course. There's you just look at it from the standpoint where there's obviously so much more input. There's so much more things that bands have to obviously maintain. Like you said, obviously every single social network needs to be the most important thing that you take care of. And there was so much less of that because, there obviously wasn't that vehicle to put forth with your band. And like it's so funny because it's great that you can distinctly identify where it's like this show changed the course of our band's life. And now, these days, it's definitely more difficult to have that sort of pinpoint moment to where it's like this show, getting this out of the radio station, this tour, it's just more nebulous. It's more like, oh yeah, it's kind of this gradual climb, or it is something, it's like, obviously if you're like a YouTube phenomenon or something like that, it's much easier to identify. But going back, kind of like born and raised in Southern California?
I grew up in Saratoga, which is... it's sister city to Los Gatos, which is by San Jose, Northern California.
Okay, sure.
So I'd go every weekend. I'd be in Santa Cruz, and that was kind of my beach. I moved to San Diego in '85, and then I moved to LA in '87.
Okay.
And so I've been here since '87. I was in like a funk metal kind of. I mean, I love like Chili Peppers sort of rip off band called the Electric Love Hogs.
Right.
In the '80s. And that just wasn't meant to be.
Right.
And Goldfinger started in '93.
Sure. And your brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, Margaret, that's 2 years younger.
Okay.
And she's actually my first animal rights experience. You know, in high school, she was super animal rights.
And is this still when she was in high school? Were you guys still up in Northern California?
Yeah.
Okay,
this is like late '70s, early '80s.
Sure.
She became vegetarian when, gosh, she must have been in 7th or 8th grade.
Oh wow.
She became vegetarian, and
I mean, and that area is definitely fertile for that sort of
thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. I mean, at the time, I wasn't really that engaged with anything outside of like my own wants and needs as a high school kid. It's just like, I wasn't thinking outside my head.
No.
I was thinking about chicks and smoking weed. Really.
Yeah.
And she. Yeah, I remember sitting around a Thanksgiving dinner, and I was, and I remembered like making fun of her, just making saying like, "Oh, you're gonna eat." I don't even know what she was eating. I guess just straight tofu back then.
Sure,
I mean, there's
nothing. No. Yeah.
No vegetarian restaurants.
No.
There's no Whole Foods doesn't exist.
There's no concept of that.
No.
Yeah.
You've got Safeway, so she'll probably be in the Asian section or like Japanese food and buying a thing of tofu.
Right. And then putting some different marinades on it, and that's pretty much the extent of her diet. Cold
tofu and soy sauce, and suffering, and I'm making fun of her fucking diet.
Yeah.
And but I just I had there's no connection.
No.
I had no like empathy or I just didn't connect anything.
I think it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard, especially obviously when you're in high school. Because for me, like the whole identification with, I personally am straight edge, and that whole world got introduced to me in high school, and like I definitely started claiming those things before I really understood like what that meant outside of my general headspace. I was just like, oh, this impacts me, and this is what I want to do for myself. But you don't have the wherewithal to understand that it's like this is a larger topic at hand. Yeah. So as you were growing up, what did your parents do as you were growing up?
My mom was a school teacher. She taught English in elementary school. My dad was a nuclear physicist.
Really?
So definitely the smartest guy I think I've ever met. And so he had high hopes.
Sure. For
his son to become some sort of engineer. I mean, he helped build the fuel that allegedly put the rocket on the moon.
Wow.
And me and him would get in long discussions about the allegedly part because he's clearly something very close to his heart about how he helped design this stuff. But he had polio. He got polio when he was 17, so he was in a wheelchair the majority of his life. Had no use of his left arm and his right leg. So it was sort of like, very limiting. So there wasn't much sports, zero sports. It was kind of like use your brain.
Use your brain. Yeah.
This
is the best tool you have.
Exactly. So, and I was never like a team sports guy, and I never really found my niche or anything I was really interested in until like, I guess it was the Star Wars soundtrack. That was the first album I ever bought. That I actually listened, and the music made me feel something.
Yeah, it affected you. Sure.
Exactly. When I was in like, I guess 4th or 5th grade, and I kind of, I played piano. Played clarinet in the marching band, which is pretty fucking punk. And
dude, I played clarinet as well for a year, and it was a terrible, terrible thing. I hated it.
Yeah, it is horrific.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I latched onto music as soon as it was Queen was the first band that I got into, but
was music important in your household? Like, were your parents?
Parents were super conservative. My dad would only allow. We weren't allowed to watch Solid Gold, which was the disco station and show in the 70s. We weren't allowed to watch really anything. It was really censored. We were a super Catholic household. When they caught a Playboy in my room, and it was
my gosh.
It was a weekend of lectures and talks about what we do not indulge in the pleasures of the flesh till after we're married. That's the sort of discussions,
Right,
was,
right.
Confirmed in 8th grade. I mean, it was very religious, strict household,
Sure.
and they, my dad definitely was not thinking that his son was going to be a guy that was going to be in a rock and roll band. That was
Right,
the
right.
last thing.
No, for sure.
And ultimately, when I started getting into trouble in high school and I started, fucking around with drugs and punk rock shows. I mean, my parents took all my albums away from me. Ultimately,
I can imagine.
That was what
that to me. That's like, I mean, when parents, I think of any generation, anytime, obviously, parents, and this is something I'll ask you a little bit later, but parents see their kids doing something that they don't understand, like just more so specifically from a subculture, where it's just like, what is John doing going to all these, concerts and shit? Like they have no concept for that because obviously they didn't do that. And so that you can easily see why their reaction is like, oh yeah, if we take this stuff away, he won't be interested anymore. which clearly that worked.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the truth is they did the best they could. And
of course.
My dad and I, like, I guess we were probably okay up until 4th or 5th grade because I was a really good student and I paid attention and I studied and
sure.
And then something just changed, and I think adolescence. And I'm not a psychologist, but my dad never had an adolescence because he got polio so early in life when he was probably right when he was going through puberty. Like it all stopped. Like his whole nervous system got shut down because of the virus.
Sure.
I don't think he could relate to anything, and I'm sure it's hard for any parent going through children,
of course,
teenage children. But I think him especially just didn't understand.
There was a different level of disconnect. Yeah.
The rebellion, because when he was going through it, he went to his parents they were everything. They took care of everything. They carried him. They were his complete support network.
Of course.
And I, when I became an adolescent, it was like my parents were the enemy.
Of course.
Like any other normal.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so they couldn't grasp it. And so I think it probably pushed me over the limit because they were so strict.
Yeah. And
I rebelled probably harder against the strictness. And so now that I have kids of my own, it's going to be interesting.
Right.
To see what happens. My kids are really mild mannered and I mean compared to me, who's super high energy and
sure
crazy opinionated.
Right.
We'll see what happens. But yeah, they were they did the best they could.
Right.
And by the time I became a musician, they certainly were. My dad was very unsupportive, and now in hindsight, at the time, I didn't get like you explaining as an adult why they may take my albums away, thinking this may lead him away,
of course,
from the danger.
This is a barrier I am trying to set up in order to make this more difficult for my son, who I believe is going down the wrong path.
Yeah. Look, I remember the On Broadway in San Francisco going to see the Dead Kennedys, and I saw them play a couple times as a kid.
Yeah.
But the first time I tried to see them, I was like 12, and I had, there's no Hot Topic, so I've got gelatin and egg whites in my hair, my Liberty Spikes, and I've got my leather jackets, my creepers that, like, I bought like third generation used for $30 at the time, which my mom was like, "Are you kidding?" And I was, my parents are buying me clothes still,
right?
And I, these blue suede creepers that I had on with my bondage pants, and they go to drop me off at the On Broadway, and my mom gets out of the car, and there's, it's sold out,
huge line outside.
Sure. It's all, I mean, we're talking like early '80s, like OG. No one has seen people that look like the way we looked. No one.
Right.
And my mom sees the line, and she says, "You are not going to that show." And my parents were going to an opera. And they were going to leave me at the show.
The most drastic,
And so they made me go to the opera with them.
Dressed like that?
I've got my safety pin in my ear and my Liberty Spikes and my leather jacket at the opera.
That's incredible.
And I remember just sitting there. I was just fuming. Like, you could have seen the smoke coming off me.
Right.
Everyone's in their tuxedos.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm like as early '80s punk rock as you could get at that moment in my life.
Right. Hating light. Like, I'm sure your parents too were just like, way to ruin our evening, John.
Yeah. They were like, you're not going in.
Yeah.
Man, and that was a historic show. This guy Evan was dating my sister at the time, and when you watch, they actually filmed it. It was something like, they were either closing the On Broadway or something was happening where it was like a historic kind of event. And in this video, you see my sister's boyfriend Evan's like on stage the whole time with Jello Biafra just I mean, it was a historic show that I'm still a little bitter about, to be honest.
You're like, to be honest, I wish I could have been there instead of down the street at an opera.
But if they could have had a crystal ball and they could have seen my life and how everything has worked out, clearly they
right.
But then again, you never know.
You never know.
You take a left turn. Even driving here, if you would have taken a different turn, you just don't know how things could have been different.
Of course, completely. And I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but that doesn't mean that you would have reacted differently if that was the case. If you had even just like a sliver of that knowledge, like your parents probably would have reacted the same way, because that's, like you said, they did the best that they could. So when you were, kind of a two-part question thing, when you were in high school, like you were saying, that's when you started to, just whatever, get into music more, and obviously we're going to shows. So like when was the actual like intro to sort of independent music after you obviously got the Star Wars soundtrack and that started? Was it through your older sister?
No, younger sister.
I'm sorry.
No, I definitely inspired her. There's a guy named Chris Caton that went to my high school. He was a senior when I was a freshman, so I was friends with his brother Brooks. And Chris grew up in South Lake Tahoe, so he was definitely my connection to that whole world. He was in a band called Urban Assault, best friends with Kevin Seconds.
Nice.
And they were the first straight edge band I'd ever heard when I was a kid. And I mean, as much as you maybe connected with it, I didn't understand it on any level.
Well, and I think that was also, I mean, obviously it's like that time frame too. It's like, I mean, that movement was still getting its sea legs, so to speak, and like understanding it. So I could easily see where it's just like, I don't identify with that.
But the Red album, the Minor Threat Red album, and 7 Seconds definitely influenced me, because it was the first music that I heard that was like fast. I heard Bad Brains, but for some reason I didn't really connect with Bad Brains, because as a singer I wasn't like HR is unbelievably great, but it was like he was so fast,
totally,
and it was so hard for me at the time as a kid to grasp onto melodies,
right?
And Ian had a very prolific way of saying what he meant, and as great or bad as a singer as he is, there were still melodies that you could really sing along to.
Right. There's a catchiness involved to it.
But so he grew up with 7 Seconds. So so he turned me on to pretty much every music when I was a freshman in high school. And Thrasher Magazine was a huge way that I discovered music. All SST Records, Frontier Records, all those labels, Southern California labels at the time, would all put advertisements in Thrasher. So that's how I would find my music.
Right.
And Chris. So Chris turned me on I put together my first band, Family Crisis, and he got
that was your very first band.
My very first band's Family Crisis, and we were like straight up like, I mean, we were somewhere between Social Distortion and 7 Seconds, like super fast, but like kind of like
a little melodic in a way,
surf punk kind of, very very melodic, and the songs I still listen to, and I go, these are like they're cool.
You're like,
cool
this
songs.
Isn't bad. This isn't bad at all.
If I was listening to this demo, I'd be like, don't quit yet. If I was talking to myself, but
sure. So
he put us on the road. So we actually went on tour, and I was in high school, and we went on tour with 7 Seconds. And played shows.
Really?
Religion. And I remember,
was this like freshman sophomore year? Or
freshman sophomore.
Wow,
yeah,
that's incredible. How'd your parents react to being like, "Yo, I'm gonna go on the road for a little bit"? Like, was this? I imagine it was in the summer, probably.
Chris and Brooks, the two brothers, they had parents that were like in the community that my parents would be able to talk to. Say, so summertime. We get in a van and go do these things. But
it's somewhat of a safe environment because these other kids in the community are being involved. Yeah. That, John's in good hands.
But this was before. This was really before my parents. They connected my trouble with punk rock.
Got it.
And I remember like Dennis, Daniel, and John Maurer from Social Distortion actually came to my house when I was a freshman. And I had my little rehearsals set up like in the garage for Family Crisis.
Okay.
And they actually jammed, so I jammed with Social Distortion
right.
when I'm like 12 or 13. And this is like hugely influential of in my life of like what I want to do. And Social Distortion, of all the bands that like influenced me, they were the number one. They were the band that I saw Mike Ness and I said, I want
to be doing that.
I want to be that.
Okay.
I don't want to just do that.
Right.
I want to be him.
That's good. I like that. That's funny that because usually it's like, there's a record or show that where it's like, I want to do that, but you like, I want to embody. I mean, because anyone that watches Another State of Mind, it's just like you watch what Mike Ness is and what he does, and I can easily see how infectious it is to be like, yes, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah. so they, the guys like raided my house. We're in like an upper middle class neighborhood, but they just raided the house. Took all the food. My parents are like, "What happened?" But it's not like it's not like they destroyed it like you would imagine, like an early '80s punk band to do.
Right.
I mean, they
just took all the food, I'm sure, and did all that.
Just took all the food, and we jammed, and it was definitely a life-changing experience. Like doing those shows with 7 Seconds and hanging out with Social Distortion definitely changed my life. But so my real dilemma, because like punk rock definitely changed my life,
right?
In so much as I found a group of people that I felt a part of.
Sure.
I didn't relate to my parents. I didn't relate to kids at my school, and I related to these. They were outcasts because at this point, I'm starting to smoke weed. I'm starting to drink, and I'm feeling like culturally and what they're saying, and just like fuck authority,
right?
Fuck the government, fuck established, fuck anything that we are not a part of.
Right.
It's just all about us.
Yeah.
Right. But my dilemma was, I loved great melodies, and I loved like pop music.
Right.
And at the time, you had to pick sides.
That's true. There was no marriage of those two scenes.
And it's not even as dramatic as Black Flag versus REO Speedwagon. Right. It's really like Black Flag versus Duran Duran.
Sure.
Like you couldn't like punk rock and like new wave.
Yeah. No, that's true. There's these huge lines in the sand. Yeah.
I loved Duran Duran, and I loved Wham, and that shit at the time, like that. People were like, "That is gay as fuck."
That was the plague. We're not touching that. Yeah.
Everyone, that was what everyone said. This is like you cannot. That's I mean, and arguably they were right because George Michael, but one of the greatest songwriters ever.
Of course.
Regardless of his sexual orientation,
right,
incredible writer. And I wasn't like. That wasn't really what I was thinking. I mean,
you just liked You just liked the music, right?
Queen's the best singer of all time, and I'm thinking about it for the music,
right?
And so I'm going to and I remember getting knocked out at Suicidal Tendencies. I'm in the pit at Suicidal, and I get this guy like just stage dives on my head. And I get knocked out. I'm on the floor. They drag me out of the pit,
right?
And I remember that was kind of a defining moment for me. Like after this is probably like 2 or 3 years, like really in like I've seen so many punk shows at this point,
right?
And it's my life, but I got hurt. Like I got hurt
right.
in the pit, and I'm like, man, I'm not a jock. I don't know if I'm cut out for this sort of. I've never gotten in a fight in my life. I'm just this kind of clarinet.
This sort of like aggressive nature that obviously punk embodies. You're just like, I just kind of want to. I don't want to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like a thinking, aggressive thinking man, I guess.
Right.
I definitely still relate to the anger and wanting to make change and being pissed off and having nowhere to go other than at the show to take out your aggressions because you are being harassed by the jocks at school. And I'm sure that still exists in 2012. I'm sure there's still like the introvert versus the fucking captain of the football team.
Sure.
Quarterback, whatever the fuck football is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that for me, I remember seeing that Suicidal show and really questioning who am I? Like really, who am I? Because I can't tell any of these people that the Police are my favorite band because the Police are truly the enemy to. I mean, Styx is truly the enemy, but the Police were really the enemy. If you're, at a GBH show, you can't be like, I think Sting's a great, I just like the song.
Right, he's a great musician. What? Fuck you.
Yeah. That was what it was like. So it was like, I kind of rebelled against the whole thing, and I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. And I remember it was the same time Beneath the Shadows came out, TSOL's third album, I guess.
Oh, sure.
They had the EP and then Dance With Me.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of went New Wave.
New Wave, sure.
And a lot of those bands did. Like even Bad Religion had...
the Lost Record, they call it.
Yeah.
Sure.
A lot of those bands started questioning, what is it? So when people talk about the Southern California punk rock movement, it's really like their first album. Like, Circle Jerks, Group Sex, or the Adolescents Blue
this
album.
time frame. Yeah, exactly.
And that's it.
Right.
But as much as and when Goldfinger came out, there was this huge article in Maximum Rock and Roll, like 4-page article. I don't know if you remember Maximum Rock and Roll.
Of course I remember.
The print was so small. It was full pages about why John Feldmann is not punk rock and why I'm doing it for the money or because Green Day was successful, all like whatever it was. And it was so, at the time, it was so hurtful as a kid in his 20s.
Right.
That and they were right. I mean, they're so right that I didn't hear group sex and say this is all I am in 1981. I didn't stick with that music until 1993. I didn't say this is all I listen to and this is the only kind of music that I think is good music.
Sure.
I definitely strayed from the pack for sure.
Right.
And that's what they're claiming, that like I was in a funk metal band like the Chili Peppers kind of band I was talking about, and that all this stuff that I'm not, arguably I guess I'm not allowed to play or say that I'm like a punk rocker or play that kind of music.
Right.
Because I was in bands that played other kinds of music.
That's so funny. It's funny that you say that, because it's like now you look at kids' music tastes in general, and it's like you're obviously allowed, quote unquote, to like so many different bands, and like the concept of you being, forbidden to listen to one band because you are part of this scene, I'm sure it still exists to some extent. Like you may be looked down upon if you listen to A Day to Remember and you like whatever this this controversial band, whatever. But the fact that it's like you had to make that definitive choice where it's like, all right, like I'm having to step away from this sort of punk rock movement because I like this other music, and it's like that I can guarantee that those choices don't exist now, where it's like kids have to make that.
No, they don't. I remember being at the demo. I mean, I still went to punk shows because I still loved those bands.
Of course.
And Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables affected me.
Well, it was to me, it was the way that you're describing it. It's you identified with the culture, you liked the music, but it was that feeling of rebellion, that feeling of this needs to be channeled somewhere, and like I want to act on this, but I also want like there's other sides of my personality and my own personal preference that I need to have as well, as opposed to just this like myopic vision of like, okay, I clearly can only like these bands that are presented in front of me.
Yeah, I love how Ani DeFranco has that song 31 Flavors, and that's what she is. Like she's not just one thing, and that's all that defines her. And as a kid, I didn't have the clairvoyance to say, this is what it is. But you had, like I said, you had to pick sides, and I wasn't able to, because I was too influenced by great songs, and that influenced me more than the culture at the time of punk rock. I remember being at the Democratic Convention, seeing the Dead Kennedys play outside, and I remember seeing like the riot police on their horses, and feeling like, I guess looking back, feeling like, man, I felt part of a movement, but the movement superseded the music to me.
Of course.
And saying something, speaking out against the wrongdoings of the government meant more to me as I was getting older.
Right.
Than the music did, to a certain extent, which I think led a lot to my involvement with animal rights as I got older.
Sure.
But it's just, and you are right. I see these bands now that are able to say, I like August Burns Red and Kesha.
Right. Yeah.
And
exactly.
It's not like wait, you're gonna get shot if you say that out loud.
Yeah.
Like when I couldn't say that I loved Sting as a kid, now it is very, very different.
Totally. And it's also funny that I think you said something right there where it's just like obviously you feeling like you were part of a movement, and essentially what punk was at that time was a soundtrack to that movement, and realistically it's like now there's obviously so many different interests and so many different movements, and everybody has their own soundtrack to that particular movement. Like, of course it could come out of a culture, but each person defines their own rebellion by whatever music that they're listening to at that time, whether or not it directly influences that. So it's funny you were saying it kind of superseded it, where it's just like, I want to be a part of this, but I also want to like different music.
No, absolutely. But all those cultures that came out, and even like, I mean, any kind of movement, like I will never be part of it. Like, I am definitely friends with Brett Gurewitz and Tim Armstrong,
right?
Fat Mike. I'm definitely friends with these people, but I will never be that, because as entrenched as those people were in the culture of punk rock historically for all of their career, I just was never that, and I will never be that.
Right.
And I remember being at Warped Tour after that article came out, like in '96, and I remember a couple guys, I'd been selling shoes for so long, and I'd been like doing my thing.
Yeah.
And I finally like wrote this song that connected with a lot of people here.
For sure.
And I remember walking through this tunnel at Warped Tour down in Irvine or whatever it was that year, and And these guys are like, "You don't belong on our tour, fucking sellout." As I'm walking down, I'm by myself, and there's a group of them yelling at me.
Yeah.
And I know who they were. I'm not going to fuck. It's just
you're not going to out them.
At the time, I was like, I was so like hurt. I was so like, holy shit! Like I've worked. I mean, I work for $6 an hour, and I've spent my whole life.
Right.
They say 10,000 hours, right? Before you can really be a master of the trade, 10,000 hours. And at that point, between the Love Hogs Family Crisis rehearsals, I had put my 10,000 hours in from like 12 to when we got signed when I was like 26.
Right.
And I just felt like, where do I fit in, and who am I? But now that I'm an adult, I know who I am, and it's all good now.
Yeah.
But I try, and I'm so grateful that I have the opportunity to talk to these kids that, and it's always a competition. There's never like really a community. There might be a tour of bands that are like bros, drinking buddies or whatever, but it's always a competition.
Of course. There's an unspoken competition, even if you're friends. Like that's just the way that the music industry is obviously built.
Never want the opening band to outshine the headliner.
No way.
The headliner.
Yeah.
They'll figure out some politically correct way to kick you off the tour eventually, or like
for sure
create enough drama online or bullshit. So it still happens. And
so like because obviously as I wanted to hit on the you obviously like here in your bedroom, like you were mentioning, where it's like since you had come from such obviously an independent music background, and then obviously being put through the system, so to speak, and you were getting so many of these mixed messages from obviously the interest of the record label to the interest of obviously the way that you produced songs and the way that you wrote songs versus the community that was shunning you and obviously throwing a bunch of shit your direction. Like I mean, it sounds like you were obviously in the middle of like this growing up in sort of an identity crisis in a way within yourself, where it was like, where do I belong? Where do I go from here?
For sure, yeah. And look, as much as people if you look at someone's iPhone, I mean, they may have Cradle of Filth and Katy Perry on the same iPhone.
Right.
They still want their bands to be compartmentalizable.
Of course, yeah.
They want to be able to say, I'm working out. Here's my workout music. I'm chilling out. Here's my chill out music. They don't want their artists. They don't want Sgt. Pepper's.
No.
Audience, kids, non-musicians that are fans of music don't want that much of an eclectic variety.
Right.
At all. So it's definitely more. It's been boiled down to this, like, as much as people aren't like picking sides, you can't really be as creative as much as you can. Like, you hear the Gautier song when I first heard it, I go, wow, this is really amazing, the instrumentation and the arrangement of the song. But his album isn't that, and the album definitely did not succeed like the one song succeeded.
Right.
Where bands like Mumford or Coldplay, like the biggest bands in the world now that still sell millions of albums, start to finish, they sound like the same band, same instrumentation, same style of music.
Right.
And kids, that's just what kids want. So it's interesting, the dichotomy of where we started from to where we are, but yet we still haven't really like come to this place of like allowing artists to really go all the way, which is why I think people like Trent Reznor ultimately to say, I'm gonna, I have to get out and be a composer of film or do something different than being locked inside a box of like their fans demanding, because my fans demand me to write ska punk. No matter how I break it down.
Right.
I've made a pop record. It failed miserably. Like Disconnection Notice was our worst selling album. It wasn't like reggae or ska or punk at all. It was like a kind of a Foo Fighters Police album. It did not connect with our audience who wants to hear ska punk. They want to recreate their vibe of being 14, smoking pot, playing pro skater. Right? That's what they want.
For sure.
And they want to come to the show and have that same energy that they did when they saw us in 96. And look, you live and learn, and I want to win. I want to make, if I tour, I want to be a successful tour. And I want the fans to be happy.
Right.
I'm not out there to try and play a bunch of new songs that is completely off the charts, different.
Yeah.
But this is all stuff that only comes through experience, and young bands still don't really get it. A lot of times they have a successful first album, and then they say, well, we have to grow as artists. We want to be, this is now who we want to be.
Yeah, we want to play to a different audience. We want to get this, we want to capture a different fan base or whatever.
And they all say the same thing. All the bands say the same thing.
Totally.
They say, they all say we hate the kind of music, other bands, the kind of music we play. They say we're not part of the scene. We don't relate. But they all, like most of those bands that I work with, they come from the Warped Tour Screamo thing.
Of course.
They sound like they're a Screamo band.
Right.
That's what they are.
Yeah.
but they say, and they all say, they don't like that sound, and it's like, and I said the same shit. It's not like I said I like the contemporary bands.
Right.
I mean, I love No Doubt and I love Real Big Fish. It's not like I said I didn't, but whenever I talked about influences, it wasn't like bands of the era. It's always
of course
cool bands from the era before.
Yeah. You obviously you need to present yourself as a musical scholar, and you can't just be like, oh yeah, like Goldfinger. Like we heard No Doubt, and we thought they were pretty cool, so we just decided to start this band. It's like people be like, what the fuck? This is terrible.
It doesn't make sense, but it's so true these days, though.
Yeah.
It's so true. People don't play an instrument, and then they hear Asking Alexandria, and they get a computer, and they just program it to sound like it, and that's what it is. But then, but it's more so now that people don't like. I remember working with, and it's nothing against Attack when I was working with them.
Yeah,
I was like, I think I said like, I want like a John Bonham kind of break. And he's like, who's that? I'm like this like a Stuart Copeland thing, and he's like, who's that?
Oh,
it really had
like no frame of reference.
They just didn't know, and it's nothing against them, but I think it's just culturally, we're just in such a different era now where it is so about now, right this second. Yep. What do they say, the Twitter imprint lasts 5 minutes, when you tweet something that's about the average.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what it is culturally. People like think about the 5 minutes that's important, and that's what they learn. Right.
And so like as you were kind of going back to obviously like when things were, just exploding for you. And like I said, like, you were, it's so tough because it's like, you were, well, like you said, your mid-20s, and essentially, you're still growing up at that time. Like you still have no concept of like, you may have a little concept of who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. So, as you were kind of, coming out of that, insanely large record, were the impressions generally positive, like from your perspective of like, all right, like I was able to define myself a little bit better after this journey, so to speak?
I mean, I think things, because in the first few shows that I saw, it was so new. No one really knew what to think of punk rock. And there was like daytime, I remember Fear played on some daytime.
Oh yeah, they played SNL, right?
No, maybe they did.
I think they did, but whatever.
I'm talking about like it was like a Maury Povich kind of show.
Sure.
And I remember like knowing about it and staying home, like figuring out a way to see that. It was so exciting. I remember going to the midnight showing of Decline of Western Civilization at the movie theater. No one knew what the fuck it was.
Right.
And so it was so new. And so by the time that it came back again, when Goldfinger was taken off 93, 94, 95, like it was so like in stone that this is what it is. Like, Fat Records and Epitaph was, anti-major label, anti-radio. It was like really like it was the counterculture at the time. And I wanted to be on the radio, and I wanted to play I wanted to play festivals where I think the ideology of what a lot of those bands wanted was very different than what I wanted. And so I had the battle with myself of like, I want to fit in. I want people to like me. I want these bands. Yeah. Like when I was at Nana, like I would literally stack 8 Bad Religion CDs in the CD player, and people that work with wouldn't know as they would go because they all sounded so similar. It'd be like one after the next, and I'd have like 4 hours of Bad Religion.
Right.
And I'm, and this is like, what's defining me in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, and getting me back into the music that shaped me, like the Social Distortions and the Buzzcocks that helped shape Goldfinger what it was. It all kind of came together.
Right.
And then when all those bands, not all of them,
when
I felt like I was like shunned because I was on the radio and that's what I wanted.
Right.
I was still trying to figure out, who I was. But then I started connecting with, it's not like Sugar Ray were ever a punk band, but the Shrinky Dinks, his old band,
of course,
used to open for my metal band, the Love Hogs, all the time.
Right.
And so I knew them. And so then they started having hits, and then No Doubt started becoming a commercially successful band. Then there was like kind of a different sect of bands that like I wanted to align myself with.
Sure.
That wanted that.
Yeah.
And so the conversation started being different. Like, how do we succeed? How do we still become a great touring band and be on the radio?
Right.
And have success across the board and play the major label system, which I was still kind of at the time I had no clue about.
Totally, just trying to figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and still be I guess true to myself.
Of course, right.
Of my vision, which really was to be an amazing live band, to play every show like it's our last, and to have songs that that will stick in people's minds, like hooks that won't go away. And that was sort of my unwritten agenda for my band.
Yeah.
And I think by our third record, I knew who we were, by Stomping Ground.
Sure.
It took, I think there's Darren's Coconut Ass is our covers record. And I think that record helped me. It was the first record I had complete control of production and mixing and the whole thing. The first record I co-produced, didn't mix. Second record I produced and didn't mix. And then this EP, which was all covers, I did everything. And then that helped me say, okay, I know how to control and manipulate my sound to make me sound like I want to as a singer.
Right.
And produce my band the way I wanted to. So by Stomping Ground, I felt like we were who we were. And
right.
I don't care anymore. Like the whole punk thing, or like not being punk, is like whatever. It's about music.
Right. And that's it. Plus, it's like a lot of those arguments and conversations are just, they're moot points, because it's like a lot of the people that shout the loudest, I find, in whatever it is that they're trying to shout for, especially when you're in your formative years, they end up giving up 2 or 3 years after, or they just fall out of the scene. They fall out of playing music. Like, they basically turn away from everything that they obviously did as a teenager, because they feel like, all right, well, I need to move on with my life. I need to like take that definitive next step where it's like, all right, here's a signpost. I need to become an adult. I got to stop this kid shit. Whereas like, people like you, it's just like, well, no, like that kid shit's my life. Like that's, that's what you've always signed up to be and do.
Yeah, man. And it was like, I studied, I'm an Anglophile like any other musician in Los Angeles is, and so I studied English culture, and I remember thinking about the Mods and the Rockers and the Teddy Boys and the Punks, and that was kind of that was their gangs. Their gangs were defined about music.
Right.
When I moved to LA, like, I guess gangs were kind of defined. I remember right when I moved here, NWA was like blowing up. So it was definitely like music was part of the gang culture.
Of course.
But thinking about like how important music was in England versus where I grew up was a big deal to me. And I remember one of the albums my parents took away was this import Stray Cats album that I bought, before they had, I think there was like Greatest Hits was their first American record.
Right.
White album, the three of them sideways. I think it was called Runaway Boys, but it was like, I remember just like culturally and image wise, like I was influenced by the whole thing.
Right.
And I remember at the time when my parents took that album away from me, I was just thinking like, how is this really good?
Right.
Like, there's no profanity. They're not like talking about the government or authority. They're just like singing songs that sound like Elvis. Like how is this?
How is this going to just be like, what's going to set my world on fire?
Yeah. But a lot of that stuff like just kind of combined for me, at the time of just like being like just everything, like the way they sang and the earnestness of the vocals and the production all influenced me. And I didn't really know until I started producing my own music how influenced I was by the sound of those albums of those days. And I remember I love the Avengers, which was a San Francisco band, or maybe Berkeley, I think.
Yeah.
They were a late 70s punk band. I love them, but there was I think it was Rap Music for Rap People was the punk compilation that I had. I think it was volume 2 that had the song Cheap Tragedies on it. The version on the compilation was way better than the version on their album.
Sure.
And that kind of shit, like I don't think my friends wouldn't
put
even
together.
Think about.
Sure.
It was just the same song, but the recorded version I liked better. Even Pay to Come, I think was on the same album, the Bad Brain song.
Yep.
I thought it sounded much better on the compilation than it did on the album, and it's just like things like that stuck.
Started to perk up your ears, where you're just like, "There's a difference here," and I want to know why there's a difference here.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. And so when obviously, in kind of dealing with everything that you were dealing with once you started to become successful, like when did your parents have any grasp on what you were doing? Like at what juncture were they kind of like, oh, like that's pretty neat what John's doing? Or are they still at that point?
I guess it would be one. Like anyone says I don't have any regrets is full of shit. Everyone has moments in their life that they wish that they could probably do better. And
of course, improve on.
Adult.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Looking back in hindsight, and I wish I would have. I wish I would have resolved stuff with my dad before he died. I mean, for sure. My dad, I just think that his pride and his ego never really allowed him to, good job,
to like
son.
relish in the
Because,
success.
I mean, he was, you know, and I say he did the best he could. I mean, with a man in a wheelchair that clearly had a fucking impossible physical life, that, you know, was a stoic man.
Right.
But as a teenager told me, you will never succeed in music.
Yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
Like right at me. You will never do this.
Right.
For him to say that and be so, own that statement, and then watch him be wrong, I think was as hard. I think it was easier for him just to say, I'm not going to acknowledge the fact that my son's successful.
Right.
Than it would be to say I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the end for him.
Sure.
And I think there's part of it, and this is like, I guess, just as we go forward in life.
Yep.
When my dad did die,
mm-hmm.
I feel like there's part of my drive that died with him, like of having to prove him wrong and to say,
oh, of course,
that, you know, you had this idea for me that I was not built to do as being a, you know, an engineer or some sort of scientist.
Yeah.
And then proving him wrong and keeping to prove him wrong throughout the years was, I'm sure, a driving force. And it's not like I'm still not driven to be creative and driven to be successful, but it's just a different way now.
Right. Well, there's a different inspiration behind it because
mm-hmm.
totally. I mean, you see so much of what people, especially, you know, people in independent artistic culture, it's like a lot of it is obviously derived from the fact that, you know, people, whether it's parents, whether it's society, whatever, they're just like, you can't do that. You shouldn't do that. And and then obviously once that goes away, you have to derive inspiration from other places. And that's just obviously, like you said, part of, you know, growing up in the human experience and everything. Two more things I want to hit on before we wrap things up, where, because obviously you've recorded, produced, mixed so many different bands, and obviously like the writing process, like, you know, when you sit down, when a band is like, we would love John Feldmann to write with us and help create music, and you've worked with obviously so many different artists from that perspective, just sonically speaking, is it one of those things where it's just like, you know, you obviously, I imagine, just approach each individual artist or band pretty much the same way that you would write your own material in regards to just like, I want to make this as catchy and as accessible as possible, or do you kind of find yourself putting on like different hats for different people?
I mean, it's both. I definitely put on different hats for different people, and I definitely try and like start a session out with an open mind of how it's going to be, and try and if there's one or two main writers, just try and kind of, you know, see where are they coming from, who are they, like what are their influences, like what are they going through right now, like what's going to feel authentic for them to
because that process, like, I mean, I've had so many different friends that have been involved in the music industry that, you know, no matter what, that's awkward, where you're just like, all right, we're putting two people that don't know each other in a room and like, all right, create a song. Like, you have to, there is that process, like what you're talking about, where it's like, all right, we got to get to know each other for a little bit in order to make sure that we're creating appropriate art, like you said, coming from a genuine place, not just like, all right, dude, let's pump out this hit, bro. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure some people approach it like that,
but I mean, it's sort of everyone kind of comes in here when it's just a songwriting session, thinking that like we got to pump out a hit. I mean, everyone's kind of prepped these days because by the time they get to me, they've usually gone through 10 or 20 different co-writing situations, and so they kind of know what to expect, and they know the label still doesn't think they have the hit, so they're hoping that I can help pull it out of them or give it to them, you know.
Sure.
Pretty much one of those two things. And so when they come to me, it really is about that. But the process, every artist is different. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a limited time. Like I've got a second session starts at 6, so we got to be out of here. Like, and so I know that, okay, I've got to come up, you know, typically I'll write a chorus first or a concept first or a hook first.
Right.
And we'll build the song around it, is typically. And lately I've been trying to write lyrics first and ideas first. And because music's pretty simple these days. I mean, pretty much anyone that's a musician can kind of come up with the same 4 chords that you can write any number of melodies around.
Sure.
And that stuff comes quick, but the lyrics are the hardest. So that's why lately, last year, I've been really trying to hang out with the artists and get to know them and kind of talk about ideas. And I'll be kind of sketching stuff out as they're writing different ideas and when they're telling stories. And maybe something they'll say will just kind of strike me as a hook or a chorus idea.
Sure.
And it's but it's always evolving and it's always changing, and the creative pool that you kind of pull from, like I have my influence. I do, like we talked about.
Yep.
And now I'm so grateful that I had because we have our formative years, right? Of like
course.
12 till 25, where really that's the music that defines.
That's the bedrock. Yeah.
And like I can't play any, like I'm working with this band Blitz Kids right now, and they're all like in their early 20s. I could never play them Jealous Again and have them go, this is amazing. They'd be like, this fucking sucks. It sounds like shit and it's horrible music is what they would say.
Right.
But to me, it's the greatest, it's the most angry music of all time. There's no fucking new metal that's going to be better than Jealous Again.
Totally.
And so by saying that, I'm so grateful that I have Jealous Again and I have Wham's first album as real influences to me, as far as like, so I have a lot more to pull from than someone say that was, the fucking, that music Nazi. That's like, only this is all you can listen to, this style of music. Because now, if they're trying to write with other people, where do they pull from? But that being said, as I get older, it is still a limited pool of real influence. I can listen to groups now, and I listen to, Alternative Nation on satellite every day, and so, I mean, I know what I like still, and I know what I don't like still. I love Of Monsters of Men and stuff I don't like.
Right.
That being said, it's not going to influence me the same way. New music isn't going to, like, even the Gautier song that I think is brilliant, won't influence me the same way the Police did.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
no
for sure.
chance.
No.
And so I like doing co-writes because their influences, if I take my influence and say, this is what I would do, and here's my melody, and here's my music, and then they take it and make it their own, then it becomes something new.
Right. Yeah, then it's coming from an original, like you said, genuine place, as opposed to something where it's just like, all right, this is legitimately a business relationship, and we're gonna not care about each other in 10 minutes after because obviously from that point on, it's like they'll have a more holistic experience when it comes to obviously like, playing in a band and actually create the creative process, as opposed to like feeling like, all right, I'm just showing up to work here,
Of course.
Yeah, and the last thing I kind of wanted to hit on, because we spoke about it a little bit earlier, is obviously, did you see that documentary, The Other F Word?
Yes.
And I mean, I myself, since I'm a new father and like have been brought up in a similar scene to obviously what you have, just the concept of obviously retaining the idea of like, okay, I've essentially been, counterculture in a lot of the ways that I have lived my life, from obviously like your diet, your, cultural upbringing, and like, it's not similar to what our parents had been brought up with. And so like, how is all that sitting with you, obviously, as you're growing up, fathering children and everything like that?
Well, I mean, I had a really, Jim from Pennywise asked me to be in the movie when we did Reading and Leeds together. I guess that must have been 5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, sure, I gave him my number. I'm like, cool. And I remember, so my reaction when I first saw him was like, why wasn't I in this movie? Then they brought up all that shit.
Sure.
In the, Kuma had to enter the room.
Of course, that's completely fine. Come on, Kuma.
She'll take over the.
Yeah, she's like, I'm gonna go ahead and take over this seat.
So kind of brought up like, am I, even at 45, I'm still not like fucking punk enough to be in this, which is funny that my brain would still go there. But
I love that you're just like, oh, I clearly I didn't make the cut.
Yeah, but Art from Everclear is punk. That's what I was thinking. Like
after watching that, that's what I was like. That seems strange because like I think I have a better understanding of Everclear's musical history, and that doesn't really connect too much with the rest of the stuff. But whatever.
Yeah. So I'm a dad.
Right.
I'm definitely a dad.
And I mean, essentially, because everybody, obviously everybody always, everybody within my, age range, like, they don't have kids. Like, that's just, most people, it's like, around 30-ish, they kind of seem to have a kid or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But, so, I look at my life where it's just like, I've been doing the same shit since I was like 15 years old. Like, music-ish type stuff. And so reconciling the idea of having a kid with essentially, I'm involved in youth and pop culture, and like that's always going to be the case moving forward. And essentially, you're the same way, where you're having to be as aware of all the new bands and all the new trends, and it's like
I was in my daughter's 4, she's at preschool, at her class, and the teacher's like, "Oh, your daughter's got a boyfriend," and like just like joking about like that she has this like she's best friends with this girl, but she's got a friend that's a guy, and they're like super like. It's just like
buddy, yeah.
And she's taking a picture and like resting her head on her shoulder, and it's like, and she says it, and it's like, I want to like pull my kid out of the school that day, just. Yeah, it's not even about
that gut reaction.
It's not even about. I don't think it's about me just saying, I don't ever want to see my daughter date, because I mean I know that's part of the picture, but but just the idea that that's even like a joke in front of her, like let's let our fucking kids be kids,
right?
And like there will be a time where I will not be sleeping for weeks and weeks when I'm sure she's super cute now,
right?
Her mom's super hot. There's going to be things that'll happen in high school or whenever that happens, and that I will have to deal with. But like even the idea in her head that like, oh, it's cute or it gets a laugh or it's funny that like you should have like a boyfriend at 4 years old is just fucking rude.
It is, yeah.
And so I mean, look, so many things, and this whole circle of fucking how you are as a kid, and fuck you mom, fuck you dad, and now you're the mom and you're the dad, and you're going, how the hell did my parents do this?
Sure.
Like it is so hard, man.
Yeah.
It is so fucking hard, and it's not like because I'm old enough that it was really like we were just talking about like the idea of. Even like so we saw the ad for the Lincoln movie.
Oh, sure.
And there are arguably people still alive. If the oldest person died at like 121 or something, there's arguably still people alive when people owned people in America.
Yep.
Like when that happened.
Yeah.
And like we, so my parents didn't talk about shit, and that's just everybody culture. You watch Mad Men, and it's sort of like you get these glimpses of what it was like culturally. You cannot relate if you're a kid thinking about the idea that no one talked about anything.
Right.
And so I never heard like the stresses. I mean, it wouldn't have been appropriate for my parents to talk to me about the stresses of making a living, but nonetheless, like you never heard shit. So you're just growing up, and then the 80s and everything was pretty good, and things were good overall. And now that you're really dealing with it, like my kids don't give a shit about the recession or economy,
right,
hurricane or anything.
Yeah,
they're too young to understand Skid Row,
right?
Or anything, or Burma, or anything that really exists in the world.
Right.
And so it's my duty to say, at some point, this is life, real life for the other 99%, how most of the world lives at some point. But now is not the time. But like how to deal with like bands that want to work till 4 a.m. and then my kids get up at 6, and I want to take my son to school every day.
Right.
I want to be there every second, because there will come a time my son will not cuddle with me in bed. There'll come a time where that will not happen. I want every second. I want to suck every second out of that, like kissing my son on the lips. There will come a time when he will not
want to do that, for sure.
And I want every moment. So every night I go to bed after I work till midnight or 1, and I go, God, tonight I'm going to let myself sleep for 7 hours. And then it's 6 o'clock, and I hear my kids, and I'm like, I gotta see my kids. And I'm miserably grumpy, and I'm grumpy with my wife, but with my kids, I'm super stoked. And I take my kid to school, and we talk about Skylanders and Star Wars and math and English and everything, and the sun and snails and solar flares and everything. And it's the best thing ever.
Right.
And then I think about my dad who's dead, and like there's certainly like we talked about regret earlier. Like I wish you could have lived for it to come all the way around. For me to really, because when I had my kids, he was here. He had met my daughter.
Right.
Been alive for about a year. He died when she was about 1.
Okay.
So alive enough for me to know, holy shit, I have a glimpse of how hard this is going to be. Totally. But now that it's like, he's got ADHD, he's kicked out of his private school, he's got to go to a different school, and he's fine, and it's all good. And,
right.
And it's
but I mean, you're dealing with life. You're dealing with real shit.
Real shit. When I talk to the guys in my band who are like, they fucking bring up this stuff about like a $15 fucking dry cleaning bill, and I want to fucking, I literally, like, I'm fucking done. Fuck you all, and fuck this whole thing.
Right.
You have no clue what it's like to wake up at 3 a.m. every day for 2 weeks when your son has croup, and you think your son's going to die, and you're driving to the hospital, and they're fucking injecting him with steroids so he can breathe. Like, real life.
Yeah, totally.
Shit.
Totally.
You know? And so, like I was talking about earlier, when I've kind of relieved myself of the pressure of being this perfect vegan, perfect animal rights guy, and I've kind of seen my world from a different lens.
Yep.
I've been able to do that, I think, a lot because of being a father and because of having kids.
Yeah.
And as hard as it is, I've been able to not take life so seriously to a certain extent.
Of course.
Because I really don't have control, man, about over anything.
Sure.
Over anything.
No.
I have control over my attitude. And that's it.
Yeah, you have control of the way that you react to things as they get presented to you. That's the only control that you have.
Nothing else, man. I mean, we're talking about the hurricane, and we're like, oh, this friend of mine has earthquake insurance, and he's like, well, if we had an 8.0, I'm like, dude, if we had an 8.0, he's like referring to an 8.0,
right?
And the hurricane, and as horrible as Hurricane Sandy is,
of course.
And my prayers and thoughts clearly go out to all my East Coast friends.
Of course,
it's still like you've got preparation time. It's a whole kind of different mindset, and then and the truth is that like we cannot control when a drunk driver may or may not hit us, or the earthquake may or may not happen, or a meteor, anything that life could bring us. And all we can do is be the best we can be right now.
Totally. I don't think that there's a better place to leave it off than that was a very nice tied up together. But I really appreciate it, John. This was awesome.
Yeah.
I was looking forward to this too.
Yeah.
So, I just knew you'd have some very valuable perspectives to share. Well, thank you, Pete.
All right. Well, that was John Feldmann from Goldfinger, and upon listening to that interview again and kind of editing it, it might be my favorite interview that I've done so far. He just is so real and so honest, and his perspective is really cool, and I just appreciate it on so many different levels. So I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the show, visit propertyofzach.com, and come hang out with us next week. Another awesome interview. More interesting guests, interesting perspectives, stuff for you to put in your head, chew it up, spit it out, recycle it, understand the world around you a little bit better. So anyways, until next week, be safe.